Well, I am pleased to be here with you. Actually interested in watching the Bears-Saints game later today, but glad to be here. And I'm one who, as Steve knows, I have deeply held religious beliefs, and I very much respect the different beliefs of people, whatever they are, whether they're religious beliefs or political beliefs or whatever. I think one of the most important things in our society is to learn to respect people we disagree with. And I think that's one of the interesting things about the way our society's been in recent years, as we've become much more diverse in a whole range of ways in terms of national origin and faith communities, all kinds of different places. People come from things all different ways. Unfortunately, the political system in recent years has been very much dominated by people who want to use religion to sell their point of view. And I use the word use very clearly because that's what they're doing. I don't mind it. I think, as I said, I respect people who have religious beliefs. I simply don't think it's the role of them to use those beliefs to sell their point. And frankly, I don't think their religions, at least most of the major religions of the world, don't call on their being used by somebody. I think that when you watch how the Jack Abramoff scandal, how Ralph Reed, who is one of his cohorts, former wonder child of the Christian Coalition, was the executive director of it, and so he ran for lieutenant governor of Georgia last year and got beat soundly, partly because people raised the scandal that was related to Jack Abramoff. That was, he was going in exchange for $4 million or something from Jack Abramoff. He was going to help Abramoff help the Indian tribes that Abramoff was trying to protect by fighting off one of their competitors in the gambling business. And the way that Ralph Reed was trying to do it was he was going to the right-wing religious ministers and so on in Texas and so on, and getting them to all start calling their congressmen and calling and writing and getting people preaching from the pulpit about how this was sinful, this gambling, and we got to stop it. And all the time laughing at the people he's taking advantage of. He was using the people he had worked with on religious things and trying to persuade them to do this because it was getting rid of that immoral gambling stuff, when frankly they were doing it. They were being paid big sums of money in order to protect another gambling casino. It was hypocrisy. It was disgusting. I would picture people who heard about it later, who had been encouraged to participate in his scam, were thinking they were used. But people often use religion to score political points. They'll use anything to score political points. Politicians like to win elections. I do. I try and win elections, and sometimes you can't. Sometimes you take unpopular stances, and sometimes that means you're not going to win. But when we talk about how people use religion in the political sphere, it's usually not to do what, if you read what the religious text of most of religions have, I mean, you can take any religion and find some things that are horrifyingly awful stuff, other things that are very kind and generous, but very few are used the way that most people who read their religious texts would agree with. And the most recent example, when Representative Keith Ellison decided he was going to do the swearing in on a Quran, we got these folks, some right-wing folks saying, we think he should use a Bible. I think, what do they think the purpose of putting some book down under their hand was? It was to swear on an oath to something you believe. So you swear, if you're a Christian, you'd swear on a Bible. If you're Muslim, you'd swear on a Quran. If you didn't have a belief, you wouldn't swear on any of them. Because frankly, the whole point of an oath is to say, I'm going to tell the truth, and I mean it. I'm serious. And so these guys were in effect saying to Keith Ellison, you know, take this book that means nothing to you, put your hand on it and swear to tell the truth based on that. That wasn't anything to do with, is that what makes sense? Is that what the point of a religious book being used in an oath is? Well, you know, lots of people have over the years, a number of our presidents have refused to take oaths because they don't believe in taking oaths. So they affirm that they are going to do that. We've had that happen. Nowadays, you know, it was simply because you know that certain people could score political points on that issue. And it's all tied up also. You would have trouble doing that against other faiths, Hindu, Jewish faith, Christian faith, certainly, because it's majority faith in the country. You wouldn't be able to do that. But the Muslim faith is easy to attack now because it's those people in those bad people in the other part of the world who want to kill us. The word Islamo-fascist, I mean, which I think Bush's people have been using regularly. It's designed to vilify people, and so they can pick that. And so some of these religious right people thought they could score points with their political base by saying, look at what Keith Ellison's doing. He's destroying what our country's based on, religious freedom, and frankly, what the idea of an oath is about altogether in the first place. So we look at what issues we have at the legislature. Tell me that anybody here in the state, I mean, well, 1%, 2%, you can always write off 1 or 2% on anything, really thinks the most important issue in the state is whether two people can get married to each other. I mean, that really, who do you know? Think of your neighbors. People, they may disagree with you on every political issue. How many people really think the most important issue facing our state is whether two men can marry each other or two women? Who cares? I mean, most people, well, they think because of their religious beliefs that maybe that's a bad thing, but, you know, it's somebody else's life. Who cares? I mean, that's pretty much where people are coming from. But, you know, you whip them into a frenzy with this and you tell them, you know, your religious beliefs mean you got to do this. And then, of course, when they get to the Capitol and we start saying, well, you shouldn't be, we don't want to write your religious beliefs into our Constitution, they kind of, well, we're not making the argument based on religious beliefs. We're doing it because it's a tradition. It's a historical way it's always been. Thousands of years of society, and now some of these radical elements are trying to change it. Not really. That's not quite the way they do it. They have an interesting understanding of history. But they were using religion to steer people into the polls on their candidate's behalf. And then once we were trying to sell it to the legislature, they're turning around and saying, oh, we're not doing this based on religious beliefs. So I went out there and pointed out that I think my religious beliefs say we ought to be encouraging people to make commitments. We ought to be doing it. And so then we get to the point of, well, whose religious beliefs do we write into the Constitution? And the whole point is none. Our Constitution is supposed to treat people equally and fairly, and that's the way it ought to happen. Politicians are very scared, as I said, of losing elections. They want to win elections. So if you look at that issue, that was, I think 2 years ago, people would have said that was the issue most people were most scared of. John Kerry, when he was running for president, what was his view of it? Well, he thought states should decide, not that we don't want to write in the Constitution. I mean, he couldn't do that. That's where Bush was. States should decide. And in Massachusetts, when they were talking, he was saying that he didn't think Massachusetts should allow same-sex marriage either. What did he stand for? I mean, he was running as fast as he could from any position on any issue because he was afraid to take a stand. And again, I respect people I disagree with more than I respect people who I can't agree with because I don't know where they stand. I mean, it means something when somebody makes a stand. And if you look at this most recent election, I think the biggest disappointment for many of us in all the races was the 6th congressional district race. We fortunately moved Michelle Bachmann out of the state legislature. Unfortunately, she ended up in Washington. But Patty Wetterling, who was running against her, was scared to talk about this issue. I think Patty's a very good person, very solid, humane person. I read in the papers after the election, one of the analysis said that she had said later on, she didn't think it should be written in the Constitution, but she supported the DOMA law, the Defense of Marriage, as they call it, Defense of Marriage for some people law. She said she supported that, and I don't think that it certainly wasn't enough to turn the tide in her favor. The 1st congressional district, which everybody says is just as conservative, or almost as conservative, Tim Walz, who was the candidate running against an incumbent. What was his view on it? Frankly, he loves his marriage. He's very happy in his marriage. He thinks, why should we deny that to anybody else? And he did win in a heavy upset. So it's not always, the thing I always figure is if you take a stand and stick to it and you believe in it, people may vote against you because of it. Mindy Greiling, who's my state representative, and I'm proud to work with her. Our colleagues all think this must be a very progressive DFL district because we take stands that are unpopular with what they see as mainstream. I think we're right in the mainstream, frankly, but she and I are willing to take a stand on things, and so our colleagues figure, oh, that must be they vote their district. They vote the way their district wants. I frankly think that if you look at the way the political spectrum works, people don't all vote by ideology. They vote by a variety of factors, and we can criticize that if we want, but it's reality. When people at the Capitol say, oh, you got to move to the center, or you got to move this way, or you got to vote this way on gay marriage because it's a dangerous issue, look at who we elect to office in this state. In the year 2000, our three highest elected officials were Paul Wellstone, Jesse Ventura, and Rod Grams. I'd like to have somebody tell me what the three of them have in common on any issue. But I think the public understands. They trusted Paul Wellstone. He was fighting for the little guy, and he was willing to speak his mind. And Jesse was going to shake things up, you know, and if you're angry at things, you just shaking things up always sounds like a good thing to do. And Rod Grams, I guess people felt comfortable with him, somewhat, I guess. I'm never quite sure how, but they did. And so my argument is we shouldn't be afraid to stand up for what we believe, whatever it is, and we should respect those who disagree. Flag burning is the type of issue where it shows how much we need to change things. The year I ran for governor, which was not a good year to run for governor, and we didn't do a very good job of it, made it through the primary and everything, but didn't make it through the general by even close. But I remember in that spring, there was a flag burning resolution to Congress. We were going to pass one to make it asking Congress to make it a crime to burn a flag. I respect our flag. I don't think we should burn it. I think we should be respecting it. I actually, if you go to my house, Western Roseville, you'll see I got a flag flying in front of it today. I do every day. I have for years. After 9/11, it was interesting to see how many flags popped up, and it's kind of, that's gone back to the way it is. But I respect the flag and what it stands for. But it doesn't mean we should worship it. It doesn't mean we should treat it as a symbol that Americans don't have a right to disagree with. I always like the people, I mean, a few years ago when they were selling underwear and swimsuits and everything with red, white, and blue, I always thought that might be seen as more disrespectful to a lot of people. But anyhow, we had this flag burning resolution come up that year, and I've never made any bones about the fact that I think the way to respect the flag and what it stands for is to protect the right to dissent, the right to express your opinion. And the courts have ruled that that means people have a right to burn a flag. And, you know, you got to realize this isn't really a big epidemic in Minnesota or the nation. I don't think you walk down the street and you'll find people burning flags for any reason. But, you know, they knew they could score political points. And that was an interesting year. I think there were like 6 of us who voted against the resolution in the Senate. Probably about 5 or 6 were running for higher office. I always thought people like Bill Luther would be ones who might stand up for that. He voted the other way. He was running for Congress that year. And I know it didn't help me. The local VFW in Roseville had given me a set of Minnesota and U.S. flags when I was elected. And I appreciated that. I respected what it meant, and I was honored to have them in my office. And they read in the paper that I had voted against this thing, and so they came to the Capitol, all of them in their caps and everything, and they handed me a letter. They called me out of the Senate chamber. I heard a group of constituents was there, so I came out of the chamber and handed me a letter, and I start slowly opening it up. Read it! Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I'll read it. And I read it. You could tell in about one sentence what it was about. It says, because you don't care about our flag, we demand that you return those flags that we loaned you. Well, they hadn't loaned me. I remember writing them a letter saying, you know, when I left office, I thought they should stay with the office and I would give them to my successor. Well, anyhow, they demanded that I return the flags. You know, it was some sort of military conquest, 12 of them against me, and they were going to demand I surrender these flags. And I said, okay, go on. I'll tell them, call my office and tell them to give you the flags back. And they took them back. And a group called Veterans for Peace read about that. Somebody wrote, a newspaper reporter heard about it, and Star Tribune wrote a little editorial saying they thought I was standing for the right thing. So group Veterans for Peace came in and said they understood. I really did understand what the flag was about, so they gave me a flag. And that one I'm keeping with me because that one really means something. That's some people who understand what the First Amendment means. So we get gay marriage. The good news is I think people are waking up to the fact that it's not a killer political issue, and the vast majority of the public who didn't really get the issue, and those folks are strange because they didn't know anybody, they thought, who was different gender identity than they do, different sexual orientation. They didn't know about the GLBT community other than, oh, they'd read some people who do these unusual things, and to them it was foreign. And of course, in recent years, as it's been less painful for people, less discrimination, we're less, not gone, far from gone, but a little bit less discrimination, and people are getting courage and standing up and coming out. And as people do that, people find out they're neighbors. The two guys living down the street aren't roommates. They're partners. And the people who work at the office with them, the people who shop at the grocery store, the people who have kids and who are in the PTA, that they're same-sex couples, and kind of, well, they're not so scary. They're just like us. Some of them are Democrats, some are Republicans. Not that many gay Republicans these days. Just because I think I'd have trouble with people hating me all the time and wanting to be part of the party. But there are some. There are people with every political philosophy, religious beliefs, all kinds of things. And the public has gotten to understand. When we understand people, when we listen to people, when we pay attention to them, we find out maybe where they're coming from a little bit, and we are a little more sympathetic to it. And I happen to think that while it hasn't been total change in things, I remember 20-some years ago now, in 1983, Representative Karen Clark from Minneapolis introduced a bill to offer gay rights in Minnesota. And I remember all these people with Christian signs saying, the Bible says this and this and this, that two men sleep with each other, they shall both be put to death. And she said, her back, she's not a big woman, standing there with her back to this big crowd of people with signs and stuff, said that some people actually use their religious beliefs to believe somebody like me shouldn't be allowed to live. I thought, you know, that's true, and it's a horrid thought. And there were people who cheered when she said that. They really believed that. That was 1983. By 1993, we passed gay rights for Minnesota. Heavily controversial. It was a big upset that we won. But that was a big change in a decade. Again, by 2003, we were actually talking in the nation about the idea of gay marriage. Mainly opposition to it, and strong opposition to it, but I think it's not changing decade by decade anymore. I think it's changing month by month. I think a whole lot of the people who think of your neighbor who may not agree with you politically on anything, who doesn't pay much attention to the political world perhaps, typical person, how they feel about gay marriage, well, it's probably not something some politician said or some religious leader said or anything that sways them. It's kind of, I've never watched her show, so I don't know much about it. But Rosie O'Donnell, yeah, she married some woman a few years ago, didn't she? Yeah, she did. Wonder how they're doing. I mean, it's kind of been there, done that. It's been around. People understand that. And they grow and develop an understanding. So I think that the gay marriage issue is kind of gone. I think 2 years ago, in 2004 election, there were like 17 states or so that banned it. Every time it was on the ballot, like 3-to-1 margin. So last time, I think it was like 8 states. Only one failed to pass it, Arizona. Wisconsin was more like 60-40. That's not doing very well. I think if it was in Minnesota, I think it could have lost. Michelle Bachmann, who was the #1 pusher of it all these years, you noticed last year during the legislative session, everybody was waiting, scared. Oh, she's going to bring it up again. She's going to bring it up again. Because most people didn't want to vote on it because they were scared of the issue. And she never brought it up again. Why? She's reading the polls. The polls say people are changing, and more than changing on it, they're saying, what difference does it make? Why in the world do we want to do this? Deny somebody else rights. It's not the biggest issue pressing in our society. So I think the issue's gone. A whole lot of the people who are the chief proponents of something like that, Brian LeClaire and Woodbury and others, are gone. They were voted out of office. I know a dairy farmer, I wrote a column last year at some rural papers printed on gay marriage, how I used the arguments of my religious beliefs, say it ought to be honored, and who chooses whose religious beliefs we put in the Constitution. And I made an argument in defense of gay marriage. Most of my colleagues are just kind of, we don't need the law. It's already in the law. We don't need an amendment. But that's changing. A state representative just newly elected, a dairy farmer from southern Minnesota, said he saw my column in the paper, and he thought, he's pro-gay marriage too, and he thought, you know, they're going to really hammer me on this, but he was kind of a race. He figured he probably didn't have a chance to win anyway. So he figured he might as well get the issue out. So he wrote a thing to the paper too, saying how he thought it was the right thing to do. Anyway, somehow or another, this guy won. It really didn't come up much in the campaign. People got past it. So I think at the legislature there may be talk about it, but out front in Minnesota, the advocacy group that's been the chief defender of fighting against that amendment is out there now. And we've got a number of bills. I've got one. I mean, I can't believe you could have votes against it, but it's one that allows a person to visit their loved one in the hospital or make medical decisions for them. I can't believe anybody really would vote against that, but I think it'll pass into law. I can't believe the governor could veto that. I think we're going to pass a number of little steps forward, and in a couple of years we'll be able to come and give equal rights for all. But it's a slow process. You know, so many other issues, I think we have to watch the rhetoric to find out how we do it. I've been telling same-sex couples the last couple of years, out front in Minnesota came to my office 4 years ago when we were first voting on it in the Judiciary Committee, where the House had already passed it. We were the one place we could stop it. We knew we had the votes to stop it, but it was close. And out front in Minnesota had a group come to my office and, what can we do to help? What can we do to help? And I said how, well, I think the language we use is important. You know, the politician thing saying, well, I don't mind civil unions, just don't call it marriage. Well, I started saying, you know, we got to take that head on. Don't kind of duck away from the issue. Who decides what words we use for things? We got First Amendment rights to use whatever words we want. And so I suggested, you know, if a couple has made a commitment to themselves, to each other, whether it's religious commitment or just a personal commitment, whatever way it is, if they make it, they can call it what they want. And Michelle Bachmann would never call it this, but why can't they call their civil union a marriage? And people, it was interesting, 2 women in the back of the room told me, you know, we took a few more questions in discussion. A woman raised her hand and said, my partner and I were just talking. We had a commitment ceremony 23 years ago. We were just listening to what you said. We were thinking, maybe we've been married all these years. And somebody had given me flowers that morning. I handed them the flowers and said, can I be the first one to congratulate you on 23 years of marriage? And it was kind of freeing for them, I think, because they knew they weren't allowed to call it that. But society says you can't do those things. But, you know, we changed the terms of the debate, and San Francisco allowed them, not legally apparently, but they allowed them for a while, and Massachusetts has been allowing them, and frankly, people changed because we changed the terminology. And I'll get to the abortion issue as another way of trying to do that. Several years ago, 2-3 years ago, I approached Planned Parenthood because we've been getting hammered on family planning issues and abortion issues over the years, and we're losing ground on a lot of them and so on. I said, you know, we got to take charge of the debate. So I introduced and worked with them on getting some things we wanted to put in there, an abortion prevention bill. And what did it mean? It meant full comprehensive family planning services available to everyone across the state. It meant comprehensive sexuality education. Scary things, I know, but I described it in the press release we sent out with the bill and so on, is a bill that would single-handedly do more to prevent abortions than all the legislation MCCL has passed in 30 years. And it's true. It would. And, you know, MCCL kind of didn't know how, they kind of stayed neutral on the bill. They probably fought against it behind the scenes, but they wouldn't publicly speak out against it. Because how do you argue something that really would prevent abortions is a bad thing if your argument is there shouldn't be any abortions? They want an issue to fight for. And I suggested to people that this was the way we ought to approach it. Planned Parenthood told me last year that they think that Harry Reid, the Senate now Majority Leader, and Hillary Clinton introduced a bill, they said, based on our little thing. So it's a good idea. They picked it up. Harry Reid happens to be anti-choice on the abortion issue. They both agreed that the way you do the things right was to prevent abortions by family planning and sexuality education. It makes sense. And I think we can reach out, and we've gotten some people who were kind of not on our side of the abortion issue to recognize, you know, this is something they should like. This should be common ground for all sides. And I don't think we're going to pass sexuality education the way we should this year. I think we're going to make progress forward. I think we'll make progress on a range of issues like that. But I think we have to watch how we use language and not be afraid to use words that we think are the right words. If somebody wants to consider themselves married, first of all, society, the government's only role should be to make sure they get equal treatment. Everybody's treated equally. The role of religious beliefs or personal beliefs should be, you can call your union what you want to call your union. And so I think that there are ways of addressing all these hot button issues. The flag burning thing, that hasn't gone away either. Senator Ryder, who was defeated this last time just north of here, she's the one who always carried the flag burning stuff and the Pledge of Allegiance things and always wear these ties and gaudy things that were red, white, and blue. I don't think it was respecting the flag. I think it was trying to score political points, frankly. And I think we have to stand up on those issues and say we're not afraid to discuss them. We're not afraid to say what's right. I thought when they demanded that we say the Pledge of Allegiance before every Senate session, and I don't care a whole lot whether we say the Pledge of Allegiance or not. I think you know the way the Pledge of Allegiance was changed to score political points during the Red Scare by adding the words "under God" to it. I don't feel really strongly whether the pledge is said or not, but they wanted to do it every day in the compromise. Okay, once a week we'd say the pledge before floor sessions. I thought that's not the way to approach it. The way to approach it is say, look, these people want to honor the flag and be real respectful of it. So why don't we have the pledge a half hour before the session begins? They can go there and say the pledge, and then they can meditate on it for a half an hour. I'm sure the room will be full of people willing to do that. I'm sure the Senate chambers would be full of people willing to do that. But I think I can very much respect people's religious beliefs. People I strongly disagree with, I can respect them. But where the only thing we should be concerned about is where they're overstepping the lines, where they're punishing other people, where they are making decisions that affect your life or somebody else's life, where our state says you can be married or you cannot be married. That's where we decide. I've been making it real clear all along that I don't think it's any of government's business to tell a religious institution who they can and cannot marry. If Michelle Bachmann's church doesn't want to marry a same-sex couple, they should never be forced to do so. That's their right. And I respect that right. I disagree with it, but I respect it. But they should respect our right to do differently as well. And that's why I'm convinced we can win on these issues. We shouldn't be afraid of them if we're up front and we try and explain them to people in the way that helps them understand. We build understanding in people. Our goal isn't to overwhelm somebody. Our goal is to persuade them why what they've been standing for in the past is wrong. And it says I was supposed to stop at 2 o'clock, but I'm going to make one more story about the abortion issue. When we talk about abortion prevention, I make the argument that people who sincerely believe that aborting an 8-week-old fetus is tantamount to shooting an 8-month-old kid in the head, there are some who believe it, that it's murder. They'll say it's first-degree murder and so on. And some of them who really think that a mother who makes this decision should serve life sentence in prison by the time you say it that way, it's probably down to 0.001% of the population. But if you start asking what they're saying, whether they really believe that this is murder or not, you look at the debates between George Sr. Bush and Michael Dukakis, one of their presidential debates, they got to talking about the abortion issue. And one of the questions to Bush was whether he thought that if abortion was wrong and it should be a crime, it should be outlawed, whether we should punish the mothers who have it. No, he shouldn't. It's the women, they're the victims. It's the doctors we should punish. He kind of didn't say we should punish the doctors, so the questioner followed up, I think, the way I recall it, the questioner followed up and asked if we should punish the doctors. And he said, yes. Prosecute the doctors, yes. It wasn't before the end of the debate, James Baker, or whoever his campaign manager was in the press room spinning, no, he didn't really mean that. Because he knows the public wouldn't stand for that. You don't want to arrest doctors for practicing their profession. You don't want to arrest women for making choices about their body. And so I think we have to talk about it that way. And when you talk about the people who maybe that skip the 0.001% who believe it's murder, and take the ones who really think it's a terrible thing, which most people do, and tell them, now who's doing a better job of preventing it? Is it Reagan and Bush and now the next Bush and whoever comes next? Are they the ones who have done anything about abortion? First of all, during a lot of their terms, the number of abortions went up. And they say, well, we can't do anything about it. We need a new Supreme Court. No, you don't. You don't need a Supreme Court. You need a new Constitution. All you need is offer a constitutional amendment to outlaw abortion. Now, we've had 16, 17 years now of the two Bushes and Ronald Reagan. How many times did they push that constitutional amendment? 0. You think they're going to try next year? No, they're not going to try next year. They know it's too good of an issue to score points on. If you really want to reduce the number of abortions, you work to prevent them. You prevent unintended pregnancies through education and family planning. And you won't eliminate them. You wouldn't eliminate them with them outlawed because they were never eliminated in the past. So my argument is we just have to explain to them people who, you're not going to persuade the political activists, but the ordinary citizens who think somehow or another gay marriage is wrong because they've always been told it was, or abortion is murder because they were told it was, and ask them to think, if you're serious about the issue, think of the consequences of what it means, because I think the best way we win is to persuade people that we're listening to them, we're hearing what they're saying, and they should listen to themselves and figure out what they're saying and what that means. And I think that's the way we win on things. And I'm honored to be able to speak to Minnesota atheists. I'm not afraid to do so. As Steve pointed out, lots of politicians are afraid to come here. I respect what you do, what you stand for. And I think our government ought to be respectful of all different values and beliefs of people and shouldn't be stepping on some for whatever. For number of percentage of the population that considers themselves atheists, according to most of the polls, where most people believe in a supreme being, some do not, strongly do not. You don't have a major percentage of the population in your camp. You might sway elections if everybody voted the same way and the rest of the population was split. But somehow or another, atheists have been tried to be vilified as evil people, vicious people, uncaring people, and frankly, a lot of the atheists I know are more willing to listen to others than anybody else. So I'm honored to be here, and thank you for listening, and I'm happy to take
And we wanted to provide you with this award. It's the First Amendment Award for your support of separation of church and state, because you've worked so hard for that. And we really appreciate that work, and we really appreciate your willingness to make clear statements about these subjects that so many people are so afraid of. And I want to thank you for having been here.
Well, my pleasure. Thank you very much.